I met Sarah on a warm summer evening in 2008. It was at a mutual friend's wedding, one of those grand celebrations where everyone is laughing, drinking, and dancing without a care in the world. She was standing near the open bar, sipping on a glass of white wine, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. I remember how effortlessly beautiful she looked, how her laughter seemed to ring louder than the music. I wasn't the type to get nervous around women, but something about her made my heart race. It took me a while to gather the courage to introduce myself, and when I finally did, she turned to me with the warmest smile I had ever seen. "Took you long enough," she teased, as if she had been expecting me. From that moment, we clicked. We spent the entire night talking about everything and nothing at all. She told me she was a teacher, passionate about shaping young minds, and I told her about my work in finance and my dreams of starting my own business. We danced under the twinkling lights strung across the venue, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had met someone who truly saw me. Our first date was a week later, a late-night coffee shop visit that stretched into the early hours of the morning. We talked until they started stacking chairs on tables and turning off the lights. Neither of us wanted the night to end. Everything with Sarah felt easy, natural. We were different in many ways. She was spontaneous, full of adventure, while I was more methodical, someone who liked to plan things out, but we balanced each other. She made me loosen up, and I gave her a sense of stability. A year later, I proposed. It wasn't some extravagant setup with cameras and a grand audience. It was just the two of us, sitting on a park bench during a crisp autumn evening, the leaves crunching beneath our feet. I remember pulling out the ring with my hand shaking and barely getting the words out before she started crying and nodding. That moment, seeing the happiness in her eyes, was the greatest feeling in the world. Our wedding was small but perfect. Just family, close friends, and a lot of love. We danced until our feet ached, and I remember thinking that if I could freeze time, I would have chosen that moment. The way she looked at me that night, like I was the only person in the world, is something I'll never forget. Marriage, as we learned, wasn't always like the movies. It wasn't just about grand romantic gestures or perfect moments. It was about sharing a life, bills, grocery lists, early morning coffee runs, and late-night conversations about the future. It was inside jokes, Sunday brunches, and the comfort of knowing that at the end of the day, you had someone to come home to. And for a long time, that was enough. The first few years of our marriage felt like something out of a dream. Sarah and I moved into a cozy little house on the outskirts of the city, a place just big enough for the life we planned to build. It wasn't anything fancy: 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a kitchen that barely fit us both at the same time, but it was ours. I remember how excited she was when we got the keys. She made me carry her over the threshold, even though I nearly dropped her, and we celebrated by drinking cheap wine on the living room floor because we didn't have furniture yet. That was Sarah. She could make even the simplest moments feel special. She threw herself into decorating, filling the house with framed pictures, mismatched furniture, and little pieces of her personality in every corner. She always had an eye for details, making sure everything felt warm and inviting. I didn't care much about curtains and throw pillows, but I loved seeing her happy. Work was demanding for both of us, but we made time for each other. She loved her job as a teacher, always coming home with stories about her students, the funny things they'd say, the little victories in their learning. I was building my own financial consulting firm, working long hours, but every evening, no matter how exhausted we were, we had dinner together. It became our thing, sitting at the table, just the two of us, talking about our day, laughing, sharing our little inside jokes. Weekends were sacred. We would sleep in, take lazy walks around the neighborhood, or go on spontaneous road trips. Sarah had this adventurous spirit, always dragging me out of my comfort zone. One weekend, she convinced me to go skydiving, something I swore I would never do. I was terrified, but she was fearless, grinning ear to ear as we jumped out of the plane. I screamed the whole way down, and she just laughed at me when we landed. "See," she said, brushing hair out of her face. "You survived. And now you have a story to tell." And that's what life with Sarah was, one big, beautiful story. A couple of years into our marriage, we decided we were ready to start a family. We dreamed about kids running through our house, laughter filling the rooms, the chaos of little feet stomping up and down the hallway. We talked about baby names. Imagine what they'd be like. Would they have her dark hair? My stubbornness? Would they love books like her or numbers like me? We tried for months. Then a year. Then another. When nothing happened, we went through the rounds of doctor visits, fertility treatments, and endless hope followed by crushing disappointment. It was hard on both of us. But Sarah was strong, always looking at the bright side. "It'll happen when it's meant to," she would say, squeezing my hand. And I believed her. Through all of it, I never doubted us. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I wanted to grow old with. No matter what challenges came our way, I knew we'd face them together. Life was good. I was happy. And I thought she was too. Years passed, and life settled into a rhythm, comfortable, familiar, and, in many ways, beautiful. Our home, once just a small house with bare walls, had transformed into something full of memories. The pictures on the walls multiplied, snapshots from vacations, holidays, and quiet Sunday mornings spent wrapped in each other's arms. Sarah flourished in her career. She was the kind of teacher students adored, the kind who remembered birthdays and stayed late to help struggling kids. I was proud of her, of the way she poured her heart into her work. My business had grown, too. I was working longer hours, but I always made time for her. We found joy in the simple things: movie nights curled up on the couch, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, spontaneous drives to nowhere. We had our traditions, little rituals that made life feel uniquely ours. Every Friday, no matter how busy the week had been, we ordered takeout and talked about everything and nothing at all. Every anniversary, we returned to the little coffee shop where we had our first date, even as it became harder to find time in our schedules. And then, after years of trying, Sarah got pregnant. I'll never forget the way she told me. She had been acting strange all day, distracted, fidgety, almost nervous. I thought something was wrong until she handed me a small box. Inside was a tiny onesie with the words "Daddy's Little Sidekick" printed on the front. I looked up at her, my heart pounding, and she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. We were going to be parents. The months that followed were some of the happiest of my life. I went to every doctor's appointment, held her hand through every nervous moment, painted the nursery a soft blue when we found out it was a boy. I read every book on fatherhood I could get my hands on, wanting to be ready for the moment our son arrived. When he was born, I thought my heart might burst from the love I felt. Holding him for the first time, seeing Sarah's exhausted but radiant face, I knew my life had changed forever. We named him Daniel, and from the very beginning, he was the center of our world. Parenthood wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, endless diapers, and moments of pure exhaustion. But there was also laughter, so much laughter. Sarah was a natural mother, patient and full of warmth. I would come home from work to find her singing to Daniel, dancing around the living room with him in her arms, both of them giggling like it was the best thing in the world. As the years passed, our family grew. 2 more children followed: Emma, our feisty little girl with Sarah's stubborn streak, and Michael, our quiet, thoughtful youngest. Our house, once so peaceful, became a whirlwind of chaos, toys scattered across the floor, tiny voices filling every corner. It was everything we had dreamed of. A beautiful, messy, wonderful life. And through it all, I never once doubted that Sarah and I were a team. She was my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. I thought we had everything. I thought we were unbreakable. Life had a way of moving faster than I ever expected. One moment, we were a young married couple, figuring things out, and the next, we were parents of 3, juggling work, school drop-offs, and sleepless nights. But despite the chaos, I loved every second of it. Michael, our youngest, was born on a chilly December morning. Unlike his older siblings, who came into the world kicking and screaming, Michael was quiet, calm. I remember holding him in my arms for the first time, feeling his tiny fingers curl around mine, and thinking, this is it. Our family is complete. Sarah was exhausted but glowing, her dark hair sticking to her forehead as she cradled our newborn. 3 kids, she whispered, smiling through her exhaustion. Can you believe it? I kissed her forehead. We're officially outnumbered. She laughed, but we both knew it was true. The jump from 2 to 3 kids was a whole new level of crazy. Our house, already filled with noise and energy, became even livelier. There were more sleepless nights, more toys to trip over, more little voices calling for mommy and daddy at all hours of the day. But there was also more love. Emma, ever the firecracker, took on her new role as big sister with pride, constantly hovering over Michael, declaring herself his protector. Daniel, now the responsible eldest, helped where he could, though he often sighed dramatically when asked to fetch diapers. Watching them together, I felt a deep sense of pride. Sarah and I found ourselves stretched thin, but we always made time for each other. Late at night, when the kids were finally asleep, we would sit together on the couch, too exhausted to talk, but still content just being next to each other. My career was thriving, which meant I was working longer hours, but I tried my best to be present. I never wanted to be the kind of father who was always too busy. I made it to soccer games, school plays, and bedtime stories whenever I could. Sarah, as always, held everything together effortlessly. She was the glue that kept our family running, and I never stopped admiring her for it. As Michael grew, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We had built something beautiful, a home filled with love, laughter, and a future that seemed bright. I would watch Sarah playing with the kids in the backyard, her laughter ringing out as she chased them around, and I would think to myself, this is everything I ever wanted. And I truly believed she felt the same. For years, I never questioned anything. Sarah and I had built a beautiful life, one that felt unshakable. We had 3 incredible kids, a home filled with love, and a routine that, while chaotic, always felt like ours. If you had asked me then, I would have sworn Sarah was as happy as I was. But looking back, I realized that doubt doesn't hit you all at once. It sneaks in, little by little, like a draft slipping through a cracked window. It starts as something small, something you brush off as nothing. At first, it was just little things. Sarah seemed more distant at times, lost in her own thoughts. She would smile at me, laugh at my jokes, but there was something about her that felt off. I chalked it up to exhaustion. 3 kids, a full-time job, running a household. It was a lot. I was tired too. But then, there were moments that stuck with me. Times when I would walk into a room, and she would quickly put her phone down. Late-night messages that she dismissed as just a group chat with the other moms. Times when I reached for her, and she would turn away, claiming she was too tired or had a headache. And then there was Michael. One evening, as I was helping him with his homework, I found myself studying his face. He was 6 by then, his features sharpening as he grew, his personality taking shape. He was quiet, observant, thoughtful, so different from his siblings. I don't know what made me think it. Maybe it was the way his eyes were just a little different. Maybe it was how, when I looked at him, I couldn't quite find myself in his face the way I did with Daniel and Emma. The thought came suddenly, uninvited. Does he look like me? I hated myself for even thinking it. Of course, he was mine. Why would I even question that? I shook the thought away, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But once a seed of doubt is planted, it grows. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way Sarah's phone was always on silent. How she suddenly had more girls' nights than she used to. The way she would sometimes get dressed up for seemingly no reason, claiming she was just in the mood to look nice. One night, after she had fallen asleep, I picked up her phone. I had never done it before. I had never needed to. But something in my gut told me that if I looked, I would find something. The screen was locked. She had never locked her phone before. I put it back down, my heart pounding. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking things, that Sarah loved me, that we had built a life together, that she would never betray me. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Doubt is a slow poison. Once it takes hold, it seeps into everything, twisting even the most ordinary moments into something sinister. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that Sarah had given me no real reason to be suspicious. But my mind wouldn't let it go. Every little detail that once seemed normal now stood out like a flashing red light. Sarah had always been affectionate, grabbing my hand as we passed each other in the kitchen, resting her head on my shoulder during movie nights, kissing me absent-mindedly as she walked by. But that had changed. It wasn't dramatic, no fights, no obvious coldness, but it was noticeable. She was just less present. When I touched her, she tensed slightly. When I kissed her, she barely kissed me back. When I told her I loved her, she would smile, but sometimes she wouldn't say it back. I started watching her more closely, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But the more I paid attention, the worse it got. One night, I came home from work a little earlier than usual. The kids were playing in the living room, and Sarah was in the kitchen, her phone in her hand. She didn't hear me come in right away, and I caught a glimpse of her smiling down at the screen. It wasn't just any smile. It was soft, almost dreamy, the kind of expression she used to give me when we were younger. When she noticed me, she nearly dropped the phone. "Oh, you're home early." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Who were you texting?" She hesitated for the briefest moment. "Emma's teacher. We were talking about the parent-teacher conference next week." I nodded, pretending to believe her, but something about the way she had looked at that screen gnawed at me. Another time, she left her laptop open on the dining table. She had gone to tuck Michael into bed, and I walked by, glancing at the screen. Her email was open. One message caught my eye, not because of what it said, but because it was from someone whose name I didn't recognize. Tomorrow at the usual place? That was it. No details, no name, just a short, casual message. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Before I could read more, Sarah walked back in. She saw me near her laptop and quickly shut it. Work emails, she said, too quickly. Nothing interesting. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But my gut was telling me something else. I started paying closer attention to her schedule. The girls' nights, that seemed to happen more often. The occasional gym sessions that didn't match the timestamps on her fitness app. The way she sometimes came home with her hair slightly messier than when she left. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. And I needed to find out the truth. The doubt had grown into something I couldn't ignore anymore. It was in the way Sarah looked at me, distant, guarded. It was in the way she touched me, like she was going through the motions rather than feeling anything real. It was in the way she always seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was right in front of me. I needed to know the truth. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking things, that I was just being paranoid. But my gut wouldn't let it go. So I started paying attention, really paying attention. Sarah had always been a creature of habit. She woke up at the same time every day, drank her coffee the same way, drove the same route to work. But lately, there had been changes. She was going out more, meeting friends, she claimed. She started dressing up more often, wearing perfume even when she said she was just running errands. And then there was her phone. She had never been secretive with it before. But now, it was always either in her hand or face down on the table. She had started taking calls in the other room, lowering her voice when she spoke. And at night, when she thought I was asleep, she would turn the brightness all the way down and scroll through messages. I needed proof. One afternoon, when she was in the shower, I took a deep breath and picked up her phone. My hands were shaking. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I couldn't live like this, not knowing. The phone was locked. She had changed her passcode. My stomach dropped. She had never done that before. That was when I knew. Still, I needed more. That night, I created a new account on a GPS tracking app we had once used when the kids were younger, something we installed back when we were paranoid about getting separated at crowded amusement parks. It had been years since we'd used it, but Sarah had never deleted it from her phone. The next day, when she told me she was meeting her friend for lunch, I checked the app. My heart hammered as I watched the little that represented her move nowhere near the restaurant she had mentioned. Instead, she was parked at a hotel. I sat there, staring at the screen, my entire body frozen. My hands felt cold. My mouth was dry. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. And I wasn't going to stop until I had the truth. There are moments in life that split time in two, before and after. I didn't know it then, but I was standing on the edge of one of those moments, about to fall into a reality I never could have imagined. After seeing Sarah's location at the hotel, something inside me shattered. But I wasn't going to confront her without proof. Real, undeniable proof. So I waited. I acted normal. I pretended everything was fine while my mind raced, calculating my next move. And then, a thought hit me like a freight train. The kids. A sick feeling coiled in my stomach as I stared at our family photos on the wall. Daniel, Emma, and Michael. My children. My whole world. But that seed of doubt, the one that had started with Michael, had grown into something I couldn't ignore. I thought back to the years of infertility struggles, the heartbreak of failed attempts, only for Sarah to suddenly conceive 3 times naturally. At the time, I had called it a miracle. Now, I wasn't so sure. The idea of a DNA test had never crossed my mind before. Why would it? But now, it felt like the only way to truly know. I ordered the tests online, one for each child and one for myself. It took everything in me not to break down as I swabbed their little mouths, pretending it was just a fun game. The waiting nearly killed me. Every day, I woke up feeling like I was suffocating, my mind trapped in a loop of possibilities. I watched Sarah go about her days, completely unaware of the storm that was coming. And then, the results arrived. I sat alone in my office, hands trembling as I opened the email. My vision blurred as I scanned the words, my brain refusing to process them. 0% probability of paternity. For Daniel. For Emma. For Michael. I couldn't breathe. My body went numb, but my mind was on fire, racing through every memory, every moment. Every time I had held them and told them I was their father. It had all been a lie. My entire life, our life, was built on betrayal. Sarah had cheated on me. Not once, not as a mistake, but repeatedly, for over a decade. And the children I had loved, raised, sacrificed for, they weren't mine. I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, the crushing weight of reality pressing down on me. And then, something inside me snapped. Sarah had destroyed my life. She had taken everything from me. And now, it was my turn. Rage doesn't hit all at once. It builds, slow and steady, until it's boiling inside you, until it's the only thing keeping you upright. I sat in my office, staring at the DNA results, the weight of betrayal crushing me. My hands trembled, my breathing shallow. I had spent over a decade raising another man's children, loving them, sacrificing for them, all while Sarah played me for a fool. I could have screamed. I could have cried. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. Because I knew exactly what I was going to do. I waited until Sarah came home that evening. The kids were asleep, and she walked into the house like nothing had changed, like she wasn't the worst kind of liar. I sat at the dining table, the envelope with the DNA results in front of me. "Hey," she said, setting down her bag. "You're up late." I gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk." Something in my voice must have unsettled her, because she hesitated before slowly taking a seat across from me. I slid the envelope toward her. "Open it." She frowned, confused, but did as I asked. The moment her eyes scanned the results, her face paled. I watched the blood drain from her cheeks, watched her fingers tremble as she clutched the paper. What is this?" she stammered. "You tell me," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Because according to science, I am not the father of any of our children." Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Then, tears welled in her eyes. "I can explain." "Don't." I cut her off. "Don't insult me with your excuses. I want the truth, Sarah. Every single disgusting detail." She opened her mouth, then closed it, her lower lip quivering. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. I laughed. Actually laughed. "Never meant for what to happen? You mean the years of lying? The 3 children you had with another man? Tell me, who is he?" She shook her head, sobbing. "It's not just one person." My stomach twisted. "How many?" She couldn't even look at me. "How many?" "2." I gritted my teeth, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. "So you've been screwing 2 different men behind my back? For how long?" Sarah swallowed hard, her entire body shaking. 12 years, she admitted, barely above a whisper. 12 years. 12 years of deceit. 12 years of waking up beside a woman who looked me in the eyes and said she loved me. 12 years of a life that wasn't even mine. Something inside me broke. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "Get out," I said, my voice low, dangerous. Her eyes widened. What?" "You heard me. Get out of my house." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away like she was poison. "Please," she begged. "We can fix this." I laughed again, this time colder. "Fix this? Fix this? Sarah, you spent 12 years building this lie, and you want to fix it? There's no fixing this. There's no us anymore." She started sobbing harder, but I was done feeling sorry for her. "I'll be filing for divorce first thing in the morning," I said. "And I will make sure you walk away with nothing. You're going to feel the full weight of what you did to me, Sarah." She shook her head, panicked. "But the kids, they're not mine," I snapped. "And I have no legal obligation to them. You can go explain to them why their father is gone." Her breath hitched, her face twisted in agony. "Please don't do this." I walked to the front door, opened it, and pointed outside. "Leave. Now." She hesitated for only a moment before realizing I wasn't bluffing. With a broken sob, she grabbed her bag and ran out into the night. I slammed the door behind her, locking it. Then, for the first time since reading those DNA results, I let out a long, shuddering breath. She was gone, but I wasn't finished. Sarah had destroyed my life. Now, I was going to destroy hers. Kicking Sarah out of my house wasn't enough. Not after what she had done. 12 years. 12 years of betrayal. Of deception. Of letting me love children that weren't even mine. She had taken my trust, my devotion, my entire life, and burned it to the ground. And she thought she could just cry her way out of it? No. She was going to suffer for this. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I sat in his office, my hands gripping the DNA test results so tightly the paper wrinkled. He read through them, nodding slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is as bad as it gets," he finally said. "No," I replied. "It's worse." I told him everything. The years of lies. The 2 men she had been sleeping with. The fact that not a single one of the children I had raised was mine. By the time I finished, my lawyer leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "Well," he said, "the good news is the law is on your side. The bad news? This is going to get ugly." "Make it as ugly as possible," I said. "I want her to feel this." And so we began. First, the divorce. We filed immediately. Since my name was on the birth certificates, I had to formally disestablish paternity, legally proving that I had no biological connection to the children. It was brutal, but necessary. Once that was in motion, we went after her financially. Sarah had never worked as much as I did. She had always relied on me to provide, to make sure our family had everything we needed. But now, she was going to walk away with nothing. No alimony, no house, no savings. I had paid for everything. Our mortgage, our cars, the kids' expenses. And with the DNA results proving her infidelity and fraud, she wasn't entitled to a dime. Next, I contacted her family, her parents, her sister, even some of our mutual friends. I sent them the results. I let them see what she had done to me. Some were horrified. Some tried to defend her. But it didn't matter. I wanted everyone to know exactly what kind of person Sarah was. And then, I went after the men. She had told me there were 2. I found out who they were. One was a former coworker, the other a so-called friend of hers from her gym. Both were married. So, I told their wives. I sent them copies of the DNA tests, along with proof of Sarah's location history. I made sure they knew everything. And just like that, 2 more families were shattered. Did I feel bad? Maybe for the kids caught in the middle. But for Sarah? For those men? Not a single ounce of guilt. They had made their choices. Now, they would face the consequences. It didn't take long for Sarah to come crawling back. A week after being kicked out, she showed up at my office. My secretary called me, sounding unsure. "Your wife is here," she said hesitantly. "Ex-wife," I corrected. "Send her away. She's begging to talk to you." I sighed. "Fine. Send her in." Sarah walked in looking like a ghost of herself. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying. "Please," she whispered, sitting across from me. "Can we talk?" I leaned back, arms crossed. "Talk." She wiped her face, sniffling. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we had something, didn't we?" Her voice cracked. "I love you even if I laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. "You love me." I shook my head. "Sarah, you spent 12 years lying to me. You let me believe those kids were mine. You let me build a life around a lie." Tears streamed down her face. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I just kept everything together, we could still be happy. I clenched my jaw. "Who's happy now, Sarah?" She had no answer. "I filed the divorce," I told her. "I disestablished paternity. I will never pay another cent for those children." She gasped. "But they love you." "And I love them," I said, my voice firm. "But they were never mine. That's on you, not me." Her whole body shook as she sobbed. "Please don't do this. I've lost everything." I leaned forward, staring her dead in the eyes. "No, Sarah. You threw everything away." And with that, I stood, walked to the door, and held it open. "Goodbye, Sarah." She looked at me one last time, eyes full of regret. Then, without another word, she walked out of my life. For good. The day Sarah walked out of my office was the last time I ever saw her. There was no grand reconciliation, no last-minute attempt to salvage what was already destroyed. Just silence. And in that silence, I began to rebuild. The divorce was finalized in record time. With the DNA results proving fraud, Sarah walked away with nothing. The house, the savings, everything we had built together, mine. She fought at first, begged for some sort of settlement, but the law was on my side. She had lied, manipulated, and deceived me for over a decade. She had no claim to anything. As for the kids, that was the hardest part. They weren't to blame for what happened. They were innocent, caught in the web of their mother's lies. But I couldn't be their father anymore. Legally, financially, or emotionally. I had to walk away. I wrote them each a letter, one they could read when they were older. I explained that I had loved them with all my heart, but that the truth had shattered everything. I didn't tell them about their mother's betrayal in detail. That was a burden they didn't need to carry. but I wanted them to know that my absence wasn't their fault. After that, I cut ties completely. The first few months after everything unraveled were the hardest. The house felt unbearably empty, like a shell of a life that no longer existed. Every room held memories, some beautiful, some poisoned by the truth. For weeks, I barely slept. I would wake up expecting to hear little footsteps running down the hall, Sarah's laughter drifting from the kitchen. But the only thing that greeted me was silence. So I did what I had to do. I got rid of it all. I sold the house, packed up everything, and left town. I needed a fresh start, somewhere untouched by Sarah's betrayal. I moved to a new city, got a sleek apartment overlooking the skyline, and threw myself into work. And slowly, I started living again. At first, I kept to myself. Trust wasn't something I could give freely anymore. But I forced myself to go out, to meet new people, to build a life that wasn't defined by what had been taken from me. I went to the gym, took up new hobbies, even started dating again, though that part was still complicated. The thought of opening my heart to someone after what happened? Terrifying. But I knew I couldn't let Sarah's betrayal define the rest of my life. One night, while sitting alone in my apartment, I looked out at the city lights and realized something. I had survived. Sarah had broken me. Yes. She had torn apart everything I thought I knew. But I was still standing. Stronger, wiser, and no longer trapped in the illusion of a perfect life that had never really existed. I wasn't the same man I was before. I never would be. But for the first time in years, I was free. And that was enough.